Right, let's jump right in. Today we're going deep on the battle for Mosul.
Big one.
Yeah, using this investor article as our guide.
Okay.
You ready?
Absolutely.
Buckle up, listeners, because this one's, well, intense is an understatement.
Yeah, it's a story that I think, a lot of people heard about when it was happening, but maybe didn't really understand all the layers to it.
Right.
So I'm really glad we're doing a deep dive on this.
So Mosul,
Hmm.
Iraq's second largest city,
Mm-hmm.
fell to ISIS back in 2014.
Yeah, June 2014, a real turning point in that whole conflict.
And it became like their capital, right? Of their so-called caliphate.
Yeah, they made a big deal out of that, declaring Mosul the capital.
Like a symbolic victory for them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, beyond its size, Mosul had, it has a lot of symbolic weight, right? So look at this long history. It's a diverse city. And for ISIS, controlling Mosul was about more than just, the physical territory. It was about, sending a message to the world, a message to the Iraqi people.
Yeah, and the investor article really drives home the horror of it all right from the start.
Yeah,
They talk about ISIS using civilians as human shields,
right from the outset.
Yeah.
Just horrific.
like a foreshadowing of the humanitarian crisis that was to come.
Yeah, and that tactic, the human shields, it wasn't just, a pragmatic military maneuver for them.
Right.
It was deeper than that. It was part of their ideology.
Or like they had no regard for human life.
Right. Like even the lives of the people they claim to be, liberating or representing.
So then how do you even begin to fight back? I mean, we're talking urban warfare,
Yeah.
like a maze of buildings and streets and the constant threat of civilian casualties.
Yeah. It was a nightmare scenario for the coalition forces trying to take back the city.
I mean, who was even involved? Who was
Yeah.
all fighting?
Oh, so many different groups. You had, of course, the Iraqi security forces, the Iraqi army. You had the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters. You had international coalitions, air support primarily from the U.S.-led coalition. And then you also had various local militias,
Wow.
all with their own agendas, all with their own, ways of operating, and trying to coordinate all of that in a densely populated city like Mosul
Yeah.
was incredibly difficult.
And the article talks about over 1 million people trapped inside Mosul during the battle.
Essentially under siege. Yeah.
Just, I mean, the scenes they described, like utter devastation.
Yeah. And it's important to remember this wasn't just, an unfortunate byproduct of the fighting. This
Yeah.
was deliberate. ISIS destroyed infrastructure, they cut off supplies, they used civilians as shields, all to impede the liberation effort and inflict maximum suffering.
So it's like that early use of human shields, it was a sign of things to come.
Absolutely. A very dark sign.
The article calls the liberation effort a 9-month slog,
Yeah.
block by block fighting. Can you talk a bit more about the challenges of urban warfare? Like, what made it so difficult in this case?
Yeah. I mean, urban warfare is always challenging,
Right.
but Mosul presented some really unique difficulties.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, you have the density of the city, right?
Mhm.
Narrow streets, tall buildings, lots of places for the enemy to hide.
Okay.
Then you have the presence of civilians, right? It's incredibly difficult to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants.
Yeah.
And then you have the tactics employed by ISIS.
Like what kinds of tactics?
Well, they were very good at turning ordinary structures into fortified positions.
Okay.
They would booby trap houses, public buildings. They'd use tunnels to move undetected.
Literally tunnels.
Yeah, and this forced the coalition forces to engage in very close quarters combat, often with limited visibility.
So it's like, how do you even know who you're shooting at?
Exactly. It was a very, very difficult and dangerous situation.
And it wasn't just about taking control, right?
Mm.
ISIS had this whole thing about destroying cultural heritage.
Right. And it wasn't random destruction.
Right.
It was very deliberate, very strategic.
Okay.
They targeted mosques, libraries, ancient monuments.
Anything with history.
Yeah, anything that represented Mosul's rich and diverse history.
So, like, why? What was the point of that?
Well, for ISIS, destroying cultural heritage was about dismantling the city's identity.
Okay.
It was about breaking the spirit of the people.
Like erasing their history.
Exactly.
And the article mentions the Al-Nuri Mosque.
Yeah.
And its leaning minaret.
A symbol of Mosul for centuries, just gone.
Wow.
And that wasn't just a religious site. It was a cultural landmark, a point of pride for the people of Mosul.
So it's like a double blow, right? Like a symbolic attack on their identity as well as a physical attack on their city.
Yeah, exactly. ISIS was trying to say, your history doesn't matter, your culture doesn't matter, only our ideology matters.
So they take the city, they instill terror, and they try to wipe out its identity.
Hmm.
Where do we go from here?
Well, the story doesn't end there. Mosul was eventually liberated, but that's just one chapter in a much larger story. We need to talk about the aftermath, the human cost, the long road to recovery for both the city and its people.
Yeah, because that's what we're really talking about, right? The human impact of all of this.
Exactly. And that's what we'll dig into next.
All right, so listeners, stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break.
So Mosul was declared liberated in July 2017.
Final.
But as the article points out, victory came at a tremendous cost.
Yeah, the city was in ruins.
Yeah, I mean, the physical destruction was just staggering.
Right, and the article quotes a resident saying, "We are free, but we have lost everything."
Yeah, that really captures the complexity of this victory,
Or
right?
the bittersweetness of it all.
Exactly. There's relief, there's joy at being free from ISIS rule, but that's mixed with this profound grief, this sense of loss.
Loss of loved ones, homes, livelihoods.
Everything, yeah. And rebuilding after something like this, it's not just about, bricks and mortar. It's about addressing the psychological trauma, the shattered trust, the fractured social fabric.
Yeah, I mean, imagine growing up under ISIS rule.
Yeah, your formative years shaped by fear, violence, a distorted worldview. How do you even begin to process that?
And the article mentions over 1 million people were displaced during the battle. What
Yeah.
happened to them?
Many ended up in overcrowded displacement camps, facing further hardship and uncertainty.
And those who were able to return to Mosul.
I mean, they had to rebuild their lives from scratch, often amidst the rubble of their former homes and neighborhoods.
So the article touches on the psychological impact, but can you elaborate on that a bit more? What were some of the invisible wounds that people carried?
Well, we're talking about, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, a whole range of mental health challenges, the constant fear of violence, the loss of loved ones, the disruption of social networks. All of these things contribute to a profound sense of insecurity and psychological distress.
And rebuilding a community after something like this isn't just about physical structures, it's about restoring trust.
Right. Absolutely. When a community has experienced the level of trauma and division inflicted by ISIS, rebuilding trust is paramount. It's about healing the rifts that were created, fostering reconciliation, and creating a sense of shared purpose and belonging.
So where do you even begin with a task this monumental? The scale, the destruction, and the depth of the trauma must have felt insurmountable.
It was and continues to be a massive undertaking. The article highlights the efforts of local communities, international organizations, and government agencies, all working to address the multifaceted challenges of rebuilding Mosul. But it's a long and complex process.
What were some of the key priorities in those initial rebuilding efforts?
Well, the immediate focus was on providing basic necessities, food, water, shelter, and medical care to those who had been displaced or affected by the fighting.
Okay.
Then came the daunting task of clearing the rubble, restoring essential infrastructure like electricity and water, and rebuilding homes and businesses.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare, even with coordinated efforts.
It was. And there were specific challenges that made the rebuilding process even more complex.
Like what?
Well, one major challenge was the presence of unexploded ordnance, remnants of the intense fighting. These hidden dangers posed a constant threat to the safety of those involved in the rebuilding efforts and those returning to their homes.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, and then there was also the issue of limited resources, both financial and human. The scale of the destruction was so vast that it stretched the capacity of aid organizations and government agencies.
And beyond those practical challenges, there was the deeper issue of social and psychological healing. How do you address the trauma, the grief, the lingering fear that permeates a community after such an ordeal?
That's where the work of psychosocial support becomes crucial.
Okay.
This involves providing counseling, trauma-informed care, and community-based programs aimed at helping individuals process their experiences, rebuild social connections, and cope with the emotional and psychological aftermath of the conflict.
So we've got this massive rebuilding effort, but at the same time, the ideology that fueled ISIS hasn't disappeared, right? How do you address that underlying threat while simultaneously rebuilding lives and communities?
That's the critical question.
Yeah.
The fight against extremism doesn't end with the liberation of a city. It requires a multifaceted approach that addresses the root causes that make individuals vulnerable to extremist ideologies in the first place.
What are some of those root causes?
Sure.
And how do you even begin to tackle such a complex problem?
It's a multifaceted issue with no easy answers. But some key factors include social and economic marginalization, political instability, lack of access to education and opportunities, and the spread of disinformation and propaganda.
It sounds like a daunting task,
Mhm.
especially in a context where you're also trying to rebuild basic infrastructure and provide for people's immediate needs. Did the article highlight any specific strategies or initiatives aimed at countering extremist ideologies?
It mentions the importance of investing in education, promoting critical thinking skills, fostering interfaith dialogue, and empowering local communities to challenge extremist narratives.
Oh.
It also emphasizes the role of international cooperation in addressing the transnational nature of the threat.
So it's not just about rebuilding Mosul. It's about preventing the conditions that allowed extremism to take root in the first place.
Exactly. It's about creating a more just and equitable society where individuals have a sense of belonging, opportunity, and hope for the future.
But as you mentioned earlier, rebuilding trust is essential. How do you foster reconciliation and unity in a community that's been so deeply divided by conflict?
It's a delicate process that requires sensitivity, empathy, and a willingness to engage in dialogue across differences. It involves addressing past grievances, promoting accountability for crimes committed, and creating spaces for shared experiences and understanding.
The article mentions the term unyielding strength when describing the people of Mosul. That seems to capture something essential about their spirit, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Despite enduring unimaginable hardship, they've shown remarkable resilience, determination, and a commitment to rebuilding their lives and their city. Their story is a testament to the human capacity for hope and renewal, even in the face of profound adversity.
It's a reminder that while the battle for Mosul was a pivotal event, it's just one chapter in a much larger story, a story that continues to unfold.
And it's a story that we as global citizens have a responsibility to engage with, to learn from, and to contribute to in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a short break and then come back to wrap up this deep dive into the battle for Mosul. It's easy to focus on the destruction and the enormity of the challenge.
Right.
But the article also highlights some incredible stories of individual resilience.
Yeah, for sure. The human spirit, it shines through in the darkest of times.
Okay.
Do you remember that story about the librarians
Oh, yeah.
who risked their lives
Yeah?
to smuggle thousands of ancient manuscripts out of Mosul before ISIS could destroy them?
That one really stuck with me.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Imagine the courage it took.
I know, right? To face that danger
Yeah.
and prioritize those cultural treasures.
Yeah, amidst the chaos and the violence.
It's just remarkable.
And it wasn't just about, preserving the past.
Yeah.
It was about safeguarding the future,
Yeah.
right? They knew those manuscripts
Yeah.
held stories and ideas,
They understood.
perspectives that could help rebuild Mosul.
Exactly. They knew that, those manuscripts, they held the keys to understanding their history, their culture.
Their identity.
And they knew that that would be essential for rebuilding and reimagining Mosul after the conflict.
So it was like a symbol of hope, a symbol of resistance.
Oh, absolutely. While ISIS was trying to erase history, impose their own narrow ideology,
Right.
these librarians were fighting back.
Yeah.
They were ensuring that the voices and stories of Mosul wouldn't be silenced.
It's like a reminder that even, small acts of defiance can have a ripple effect.
For sure.
Inspire others and contribute to a larger movement for change.
Yeah. It's those individual stories of courage
Right.
and resilience.
Yeah.
They weave this thread of hope
Mm-hmm.
through the narrative of destruction and loss.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that even in the face of, just overwhelming adversity, the human spirit can endure
Right.
and find ways to resist, to rebuild, to reimagine a better future.
So we've explored the strategic importance of Mosul,
Mm-hmm.
the brutality of ISIS rule, the complex challenges of liberation and rebuilding,
Yeah.
and the incredible resilience of the Iraqi people.
We've covered a lot.
What are some key takeaways you hope listeners will get from this deep dive?
I think, one of the most important things to understand is that the Battle for Mosul wasn't just an isolated event.
Right.
It was part of a much larger story, right?
Yeah.
A story about geopolitical forces, ideological struggles, systemic failures.
So like all these things kind of came together to create this perfect storm.
Yeah, yeah. And those things, they created the conditions for extremism to flourish.
And I think it's easy to, hear about these conflicts in the news,
Yeah.
but then become kind of desensitized to the human cost.
For sure. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the statistics.
But this deep dive forced me to really confront the individual stories,
Right.
the faces behind the statistics.
That's the power of, really diving deep into a specific event.
Yeah.
It allows us to connect with that human dimension of conflict,
Okay.
to understand the complexities and nuances that are often lost in the headlines.
And it highlights the long-term consequences of war.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just about the physical destruction. It's
Mhm.
about the psychological scars.
Social fragmentation.
Yeah, and the ongoing challenges of rebuilding lives and communities.
Those invisible wounds.
They can linger for generations.
So where do we go from here? What can we, like as individuals, do to contribute to a more just and peaceful world?
That's a big question. But I think it starts with, staying informed, engaging with diverse perspectives, and challenging our own biases.
Okay.
It's about, supporting organizations that are working on the ground to provide humanitarian aid, promote peace building, address the root causes of conflict.
And recognizing our shared humanity,
Yeah.
right? Like understanding that the lines that divide us are often kind of arbitrary and constructed.
Yeah, yeah. We're all interconnected, What happens in one part of the world affects us all.
That's a good point.
If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity,
Yeah.
I encourage you to keep exploring.
Mhm.
Learn more about Mosul, about the fight against extremism,
Right.
about the ongoing efforts to build a more just and peaceful world.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought.
Yeah.
Imagine yourself standing in Mosul today. The city's still rebuilding.
Okay.
Scars are visible.
Yeah,
But there's this, sense of hope in the air. The streets are bustling with life.
I like it.
Kids are playing. People are working together to create a better future. Hold that image in your mind and let it inspire you to act, to contribute, to make a difference in whatever way you can.
Powerful image.
Yeah,
The story of Mosul is, it's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit
it really is.
and a reminder that even amidst darkness, there is always hope.
That's a good note to end on.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.